Ever walk away from a conversation thinking, why did I say that? Yeah, me too. Or you replay it later and think, I sounded so awkward. I should have said something smarter. Or why did I over-explain that one thing? Here's the good news. Once I figured out a few key shifts, that awkward second-guessing feeling basically disappeared. Not because I suddenly became extroverted, not because I memorized better lines, because I learned how confident people actually think during conversations. In this video, I've got 6 super practical tips to share with you, so let's get straight into it. And the first one has nothing to do with personality and everything to do with where your attention is. Okay, so most awkward conversations don't fall apart because you don't know what to say. They fall apart because halfway through the interaction, your attention quietly turns inward. You're no longer listening, you're monitoring. You start thinking, am I talking too much? Do I sound interesting? Was that a weird thing to say? And the moment that happens, the conversation tightens because you hesitate, you rush, you start editing yourself in real time. Here's the strange part. This isn't actually about confidence at all. It's about where your attention is pointed. There's a well-studied phenomenon in psychology called the spotlight effect. We massively overestimate how much other people are noticing and judging us. In reality, most people are far too busy thinking about themselves to be critiquing your conversational performance. But when your attention stays locked on you, the conversation starts to feel really effortful and stilted and a little off. The people who come across as confident in conversation, they aren't more polished. They're just not auditioning. They're present, they're curious, and they're focused outward, not inward. And once you understand that, everything shifts. That's why the first and most important move is this. Stop trying to sound interesting, be interested instead. Because the moment you stop performing, you stop overthinking. And when you stop overthinking, conversation starts to flow. Now, once you've shifted your attention outward, there is a second mistake that trips people up. They start asking questions, but somehow the conversation still feels awkward. That's what we're fixing next. Okay, so once you stop over-monitoring yourself and you genuinely turn your attention outward, most people do the next logical thing. They start asking more questions. And at first, that feels like progress. But then the conversation starts to feel off again. Not awkward exactly, just flat, a little forced. Like you're interviewing the person instead of connecting with them. You ask, what do you do? Where are you from? How long have you lived here? And suddenly you're running a very polite Q&A session. Here's the issue. Conversation doesn't break down because you're asking questions. It breaks down because the questions don't go anywhere. They collect facts, but they don't build any kind of momentum. Confident conversationalists don't ask more questions, they ask better ones. Questions that invite story. Questions that reveal values. Questions that give the other person something to step into. And then, this part matters, they don't immediately jump to the next question. They stay with the answer. They pick up one thread and pull it just a little further. That's the difference between what do you do and what part of your work do you actually enjoy the most right now? Or how was your trip versus what surprised you the most about it? The conversation starts to feel natural, not because it's smooth, but because it's specific. It scratches the surface beneath just generic questions that feel like you're filling time and not really interested in the answers. So tip number 2 is to ask better questions, not more questions. Because depth creates ease. And once you've learned how to ask questions that actually open people up, there's another habit that quietly sabotages confidence, even in people who are great listeners. It's what happens in the split second before you speak. So let's talk about that next. So there's a moment in almost every conversation that most people don't even realize is happening. Someone finishes speaking, and instead of actually hearing the last few words, your brain is already racing ahead. You're preparing your response. You're rehearsing the perfect follow-up. You're deciding how to sound smart or funny or appropriate. You're getting ready to jump in before the silence gets uncomfortable. And ironically, that's exactly what creates the discomfort. Because when you're busy preparing, you're no longer present. Here's what confident conversationalists understand, often instinctively. They don't rush to fill space. They trust that a pause won't expose them. In fact, a pause usually does the opposite. Research on communication and leadership consistently shows that people who allow space before responding are perceived as more confident, more thoughtful, and more authoritative. Silence doesn't signal uncertainty. It signals composure. And when you give yourself permission to pause, even for a single breath, your response becomes grounded instead of reactive. You stop scrambling, you stop over-explaining, you stop trying to get it right. You simply respond to what was actually said. That's why this shift is so powerful. So tip number 3 is to drop the mental rehearsal, respond, don't prepare. Because ease doesn't come from having something ready. It comes from trusting yourself in real time. Now, I want to address something that came up in the comments of another video that I made recently that was called 5 Tiny Habits That Make You Instantly Magnetic. In that video, when I talked about the power of pausing before you speak, a number of people said, I tried that, and the other person just jumped in and kept talking about themselves. And I totally get why that feels discouraging. But here's the reframe, and this is really important. When you pause and someone immediately fills the space, that's not a failure of confidence. It's information. What it's telling you is one of 2 things. Either this person is uncomfortable with silence, or this person is used to conversations where they do most of the talking. And neither of those things means you did anything wrong. In fact, something very interesting is happening. Your pause has removed the usual social scaffolding. You're no longer managing the flow for them. You're no longer rescuing the conversation. And some people will immediately step in, not because you lack confidence, but because you're no longer doing the work for them. So here's the key distinction that most people miss. Confident conversation is not about controlling the outcome. It's about maintaining your internal posture. You don't need to interrupt. You don't need to rush back in. You don't need to reclaim airtime. You simply wait and then respond when there's a natural opening. And if that opening never comes, that's also information, because ease in conversation isn't about forcing balance. It's about noticing who can meet you in presence and who can't. So the pause isn't there to guarantee a perfect exchange. It's there to tell you the truth about the dynamic. And when you understand that, you stop taking other people's behavior personally and you stay grounded in your own. Right here is where I'll add a quick side note, because this ties directly into what we're talking about. One of the tools that's genuinely helped me to stop overthinking and trust myself more in conversation is Shortform. I have mentioned them before, but what I love is that it helps me to absorb good ideas about communication, psychology, leadership, without feeling like I need to memorize or perform them. So when I'm actually talking to someone, I'm not reaching for lines or concepts. I'm just responding. So I will link it below if you want to check out Shortforming, including a link to a free trial for my audience. So now let's keep going, because the next pattern is a big one. All right, now once you stop rehearsing and start responding, another pattern tends to show up, especially in people who care deeply about being understood. They start saying a little too much. That's what we're fixing next. So there's a very common instinct that kicks in during conversation, especially when you want to come across well. You start explaining, you add context, you clarify, you justify, you soften what you just said just in case. It often sounds like this. I might be wrong, but this is probably silly, but I don't know if this makes sense, but. And before you realize it, a simple thought has turned into a long, winding explanation. Here's the problem. Over-explaining doesn't make you clearer. It makes you sound uncertain. Not because your ideas aren't good, but because confidence isn't communicated through sheer volume of words spoken. It's communicated through precision. People who come across as confident in conversation tend to say less, but what they say lands. They're not rushing to justify themselves. They're not cushioning every sentence. They trust that what they've said is enough. And here's the reframe that changes everything. You don't need to convince people that you're worth listening to. You need to let your words breathe. Shorter statements, clearer endings, no verbal apologies attached. So tip number 4 is to say less, but mean it more. Because confidence isn't about filling space. It's about being comfortable leaving it. Now, once you start speaking more cleanly and with more restraint, something interesting happens. You realize that not every conversation needs to feel perfectly balanced, and releasing that expectation creates a surprising amount of ease. And that's what we're talking about next. So here's a quiet rule that most people are following in conversations without ever questioning it. They believe a good conversation has to be perfectly balanced, equal airtime, equal contribution, a kind of invisible conversational scorecard. So if the other person talks for a while, you feel pressure to match it. If there's a lull, you feel responsible for rescuing it. And that pressure alone is enough to make conversation feel like work. But confident conversationalists don't operate that way. They understand something very freeing. Not every conversation is meant to be even. Some conversations are 70-30. Some are 80-20. Some days you talk more. Some days you barely talk at all. And none of that means the conversation isn't working. In fact, research on social connection consistently shows that what people remember isn't how much you spoke, it's how the conversation felt. Did they feel at ease? Did they feel heard? Did they feel comfortable being themselves? That's what creates connection. So when you stop managing airtime, you stop managing yourself. You relax, you listen better, you speak when you actually have something to say, not just because it's your turn. And that's the shift. So tip number 5 is let the conversation be uneven. Because ease doesn't come from balance. It comes from releasing the need to control. Now, quick pause here. If this is resonating and you're realizing that confidence in conversation doesn't come from better scripts, but from a steadier inner state, I want to invite you into the Reset. It's a free 5-day challenge that helps you to quiet the internal noise, rebuild trust in yourself, and start showing up with more ease and confidence in conversations and beyond. It's linked below. Go ahead and join now and then come on back because the next shift pulls all of this together. Okay, now once you stop over-managing conversations, the questions, the pauses, the airtime, something deeper starts to emerge. You realize this isn't just about what you're saying, it's about who you believe you are when you walk into a room. And that's where most advice stops short. So let's talk about that next. Up to this point, everything that we have talked about might sound like communication technique. How to pause, what to ask, what to say less of, and those things matter. But here's the truth most people never hear. The most confident conversationalists aren't actually doing something different. They're being someone different. Not louder, not more charismatic, not more polished, just more settled in themselves. Because when you walk into a conversation believing that you need to earn your place, prove your value, or justify why you belong, every word carries that tension. You can hear it, you can feel it, and other people sense it too. But when your internal posture shifts, when you see yourself as someone who already belongs, your behavior changes automatically. You stop scrambling for the right thing to say, you stop over-explaining, you stop managing how you're coming across, not because you're trying to be confident, but because you trust yourself socially. This is why surface level tips only take you so far. You can memorize better questions, you can practice pausing, you can refine your delivery, but if your identity is still, I'm not naturally good at this, those tools will always feel fragile. The real shift happens when your identity becomes, I'm someone who can handle myself in conversation. And here's the assumption underneath that identity, the one that quietly determines how you show up before you say a single word. Confident conversationalists walk into rooms assuming they are already enough. They don't assume they need to impress. They don't assume they need to perform. They don't assume they need to earn connection. They assume belonging first. And when you start from that place, everything that we have talked about becomes natural. Curiosity feels easy because you're not busy proving yourself. Pauses feel comfortable because silence isn't a threat. Speaking less feels safe because you trust that your words have weight. Ease isn't something you do, it's what shows up when you stop trying to justify your presence. So this is tip number 6. Assume you already belong. Because the most confident thing you can bring into a conversation is the belief that you don't need to earn your place in it. All right, bottom line here after all 6 of these tips is that if you've ever walked away from a conversation replaying everything you said, this isn't about fixing your personality. It's about removing the friction that's been getting in the way of how you already communicate. Confidence isn't louder, it isn't flashier, it's much quieter than that. And once you feel it, other people will feel it too. Now, if you want to keep building this from the inside out, watch the video that I am linking on the next screen. It's called 5 Habits That Quietly Kill Your Magnetism and How to Fix Them. It pairs perfectly with what we have talked about today, and it will change how people experience you. I will see you there. The conversation starts to feel really effortful and stilted and a little off. Is effortful a word? Effortful? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it might be a word. I'm going to go with it because I kind of like it. It's like an effort to say effortful.